Hello, gorgeous souls. Today, we are going to have a conversation that is long overdue. We are going to talk about herpes, but not just herpes. We're going to talk about genital herpes. And there is a reason that I am specifically calling on genital herpes because there are several herpes viruses. There's the herpes virus that causes cold sores, and there is the herpes virus that causes chickenpox and shingles. There is Epstein-Barr, which also causes infectious mononucleosis, and there's several others. But specifically, we are talking about genital herpes because that is the only type of herpes that causes shame. There is no other herpes virus that creates the level of shame as the genital herpes. So let's get into it. Now, before you hit that pause button, because it might make you uncomfortable, take a deep breath with me. In through your nose, out through your nose. This conversation often causes discomfort, so take care of your nervous system. We are not going to be rattling things. The intention here is to provide information and I hope some comfort. So whether you have been recently diagnosed with herpes or if you have been living with the virus for many years, or if you are just here listening because you want to educate yourself, this episode is for you. The first thing I want to say is that herpes doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're 25 or 55, whether you are single or married. It doesn't matter how much money you have, whether you are a CEO or a stay-at-home parent. And it certainly does not define who you are or your worth as a person, right? None of those things matter. None of those things matter. Here's a story. I always want to tell you a story. A few weeks ago, I got a message from a potential client. We'll call her Jane. And Jane is 47 years old and she's recently divorced. She's just dipping her toes back into the dating pool. And as a precaution, she got herself checked for all the STDs. And she asked for a herpes virus test, which I should say, at least here in America, they don't normally test you for it unless you're having an outbreak. So she gets her test results back and she tests positive for herpes. And she was devastated. In her message, she said, "Stacy, I feel like my love life is over before I even had a chance to restart." Maybe you have felt like Jane in the past. And if you do, or if you have, I want you to listen closely. Your love life is far from over. In fact, this might just be the beginning of the most authentic, connected relationships you have ever had. And that sounds very strange, I know, since we're talking about herpes, but stay with me. Do not turn this off. Stay with me. I've got a point and I'm going to deliver. We have all been conditioned to see herpes as a stigma. We've seen those jokes, those terrible jokes in movies and television. The ones where herpes is the punchline. It's the ultimate ew. It's that thing like, oh my God, like you probably have herpes. The jokes are unfunny. Not only that, but they're very harmful. And they perpetuate a stigma that can be way more painful than the actual virus itself. The stigma of having herpes is so much worse than the actual condition. I know this. I actually test positive for herpes. That's my next story. So I think I was 40 when I was diagnosed with herpes. I am pretty sure that I know who gave it to me. However, I had also just had a really terrible experience with shingles. Like just months before, I was diagnosed with genital herpes. And again, shingles is a herpes virus. So I can't say with any certainty that the person I believe may have given it to me. I can't say for certain that they did. It is possible that the virus could have been sleeping in my body and was awakened by the shingles experience, which was very physically traumatic to my body. However, no matter when it happened or where it came from, I tested positive. I was not quite 41. I was like 40 and a half. Anyway, I was in a relationship at the time, and that meant that I had to tell my partner that I had tested positive for herpes. It actually was a non-issue. And, but that relationship didn't continue. So that also meant that I had to tell future partners that I had tested positive for herpes. And here I am all these years later, and I have had in the last decade, because I am in my early 50s now. So over the last decade, I have had sex. I've had a regular, normal, healthy sex life. To the best of my awareness, I have never transmitted herpes to anybody that I've been with. I have not had a partner that has tested positive for herpes. So I said all that to say it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. But stay with me. I've got more to tell you. My story is not the end of this episode, because the truth is herpes is so common. Genital herpes is very common. And just so we're clear, the genital herpes can be either HSV1, which is commonly the herpes virus that shows up as cold sores on and around the mouth. But that type of herpes can also show up in the genitalia. And then there's HSV2, which once upon a time they believed only showed up in the genitals, which isn't true either. Either way, according to the World Health Organization, about 67% of the global population under 50 has HSV1, and 13% of the global population under 50 has HSV2. That is billions of people, folks. Billions. Did I say billions? Billions. And this is the thing. They don't have any statistics about people over 50 or even over 40. But just to give you context, if there are 67% of the people under 50 who have HSV1 and 13% who have HSV2, those people are not going to be under 50 forever. Do you understand? Like, you get where I'm going? Those people are going to grow up. And so those numbers are billions even while they're under 50. So that doesn't even count the people that are over 50, which would mean that those numbers would be even higher. So if it's so common and if such a huge swath, I mean, if we combine the 13% and the 67%, I'm sure that we would be well over 70% of the population if they were both linked together, right? But if it's so common, because that's almost 100%, like there's not that many people then that don't have herpes, right? So if that's true, why are we treating it like it's some rare, scary disease? Well, the answer is not simple. The answer is layered and nuanced. The answer is layered and nuanced. So, but here's what the media doesn't tell you, because, a lot of what we think we know about herpes is shaped by those punchlines and stories about, people feeling like they have a scarlet letter. the narrative is never good when it's talked about in television, film, or on the news or whatever. What the media doesn't tell you is that most people with herpes lead perfectly normal, healthy lives. They have relationships, they have great sex, they have families. They have families. Some of them have multiple lovers. I've been one of those people. And they just are living their life normally, like you imagine people without herpes are. Like that's what the people with herpes are doing. They're doing the things that people without herpes do. The truth is, herpes is a skin condition. It is not a life sentence. It is a skin condition, not a life sentence. Some of y'all are feeling a way just from me saying this. Some of y'all are convinced that I'm being too cavalier about it. I once had someone tell me that they were bothered by the idea that I was trying to make herpes normal. I'm not trying to make herpes normal. It is normal. I'm not trying to do that. These are not my statistics. This is the World Health Organization that is making it. I didn't come up with these statistics, so I'm not trying to make herpes normal. It is normal. But you might be thinking, if I have herpes, Stacey, how am I supposed to tell someone else? Because that's the part that is hard for people. Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I have written a small, tiny book all about it. It's called How Do I Tell Them I Have Herpes? And it's packed with practical advice and scripts to help you navigate the conversation. The book drops on October 23rd, but you can pre-order your copy today. There's a link in the show notes. Everyone who pre-orders a copy will get free admission to my upcoming Safer Sex class, where we're just going to be talking about how to have a conversation about sex before you start a sexual relationship with someone. Also, how to disclose. We're going to unpack a little bit further, like how to disclose positive status, whether it's herpes or something else. Going to be entertaining. So I'm going to make sure it's not sterile, but mostly it's going to be really informative and relatable. So all you have to do is pre-order your copy and you'll get free admission to the class. But right now I'm going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek. The key to disclosing your herpes status with confidence is really about whether you approach the conversation with shame or fear, or if you're just telling some truth. So you actually set the tone for how the other person will receive the information. So when you come from the space of self-acceptance and knowledge, you're actually showing your partner that it's just a diagnosis. It's not a defining characteristic, right? It might be hard to wrap your head around that, but I'm speaking just from personal experience that I have never had a conversation where I shared my status with somebody where I sounded unsure of myself. Even at the beginning, when I was just practicing, I would tell anybody who was a potential partner, anybody that I matched with on a dating app, if we had a telephone conversation or if we met for coffee. It wasn't necessarily about whether I thought they were fuckable or whether I was interested in having sex with them. I was just practicing having the conversation. And in all these years, and like I said, it's been more than a decade since my diagnosis. In all these years, I have only had one person who said that they were unwilling to take the risk. And even he was apologizing to me. He was like, I'm so sorry because I really like you. And I was like, you don't have to apologize. So even in that, it wasn't a terrible experience. Like, I have never been shamed or ridiculed even when I've disclosed my status. In fact, in my experience, the people were relieved, and most of them said that they had never had anybody even be so candid and honest about their sexual history, which is sad, right? Because that should be normal. But that has been the experience that I've had. So it really is, again, it's a matter of how you feel about yourself that actually sets the tone for how someone else receives it. But now I want to talk a little bit more though about sex, because that's usually the biggest worry that comes up with relationship to a positive herpes status. Will I ever have satisfying sex again? Will I ever have a normal sex life again? And the answer to that is yes, if you want to, with the right precautions and open communication. There is no reason why herpes should stop you from having a fulfilling, pleasurable sex life. And as an aside, I should add, when I say precautions, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're never going to go bareback, because I know that that's what some people are thinking. That doesn't necessarily mean that. And that is a more nuanced and personal structure. For me, when I have started relations with a new partner, condoms are involved anyway. And then after I've had a long-term experience with somebody, or we, mutually agree to move to the next step where we are no longer using those barriers, that is not something that someplace I go with every person. And just for the record, right now, I only have one partner. Although I do identify as polyamorous, I have been in a monogamous season for quite some time. So, but maybe for you, for peace of mind, for you, you might decide that barrier methods are something you're going to always use. And that's okay if that works for you. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you never have skin to skin contact with another person. And it's a matter of knowing your own body and being able to tell the signs. For some people, that looks like using antiviral drugs and medications for the rest of your life. If that is something you want to do, that's a conversation for you and your doctor. There are so many other ways to navigate it. So my experience is not necessarily the norm. And so I don't want to make this episode all about, precautions. But the point I'm making is that you can design a structure or a flow or a rhythm for how you move, but it must include open communication and whatever the right precautions are for you. Another thing that I really want to point out is that a positive herpes diagnosis can actually improve your sex life in the long run, which sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, but stay with me. I'm going somewhere that makes sense in a minute. So how is one of the things about having a positive herpes diagnosis is it forces you to have intimate conversations about sexual health. And let's be real, there are a lot of really, really grown folks, and I'm talking over 40, that do not have conversations about sexual health at the start of a relationship or in the middle of a relationship or while the relationship is going on. There are people who never talk about it. And there are people who test positive for herpes that don't talk about it. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen. Obviously, the person who I think could have possibly gave it to me did not disclose their status. So that is true. There are a lot of people that don't talk about it. But if you are a conscious individual, and if you are someone who wants to live by the golden rule, that being treating others how you want to be treated, if you believe in love, if you want to be loving, having conversations about sexual health is not optional, it is required. If you're willing to have these intimate conversations about sex, it allows you to really tune into your body and recognize your needs. And it often leads to a deeper level of trust and connection with the other person. I am not saying this because it sounds great on paper. I am saying this because this is my lived experience, and this is the lived experience of clients that I have worked with. So this is not some arbitrary thing that I'm just saying, on a whim. It's true. It's true. Because remember, herpes doesn't change who you are. You are still the same smart, sexy, vibrant person you've always been. You still deserve love, pleasure, and connection. And there are so many people out there who are willing to accept you for who you are. And some of those people might test positive for herpes too. So, what's the homework for this week? Because there's always some homework. I just want you to feel into this truth. I'm not going to call it an idea. It's a truth. And repeat after me. I am worthy of love and connection. I want you to feel into that. I want that to be your mantra for the next week. I want you to write it down like standards. Look, if you're over 40, you know what I'm talking about. I want you to write it down again and again and again and again. I want you to doodle it when you're on the phone talking and you're just mindlessly doing something. I want you to speak it out loud, like to yourself, with yourself, by yourself. I want you to do that because you are deserving of all the love and the joy that you can muster. I want you to be filled to capacity with love and joy, whether you test positive or not. And if you're struggling with acceptance, I get it. That's okay. That's okay. There's no shame in struggling with acceptance. Healing is a practice. It takes time. Be patient with yourself. Get support if you need it. There are support groups. There are therapists who specialize in sexual health. There are relationship coaches who have experience with this kind of thing. I know a gal. But more than that, I just want you to know that you don't have to navigate this alone. One of the reasons that the stigma for herpes has thrived so much for so long is there's the media part and there's the punchlines and all that stuff. But also it's because so many people are just suffering quietly and alone. Let me tell you something about shame. Shame cannot exist once it is spoken. Right? Like if once you start talking about shame, it magically disappears. But if you don't talk about it, shame will put a chokehold on you so bad, it will literally take your voice. Shame will literally take your voice. You do not have to let it win though. So if you need support, get it. Google has a whole bunch of information. Google has a whole bunch of information. And like I said, there are support groups. I will try to put some of the resources that I'm aware of in the show notes. But there are support groups, there are therapists, there are coaches, there are other people who test positive too. There is a huge, like I said, remember the statistics don't lie. There's a lot of people out there. So you are not alone. So there's no reason for you to go through it alone. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you about my upcoming tiny book, How Do I Tell Him I Have Herpes, and the webinar on safer sex conversations. So check out the links in the show notes for more information. And remember, love is accepting yourself fully, wholly, completely. You are loved. Even if you can't feel it all the time, you are loved. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for showing up. I love you.